My guest today is Dr. Yoel Guzansky, a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, specialising in Gulf politics and security. Dr. Guzansky was a visiting fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, an Israeli Institute postdoctoral fellow, and a Fulbright scholar. He served on Israel's National Security Council in the Prime Minister's office, coordinating the work on Iran and the Gulf under 4 national security advisors and 3 prime ministers. We spoke about the deal that has been brokered by the United States between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. I'd like to welcome Dr. Yoel Guzansky to the Israel Connection on JA Community Radio in Melbourne, Australia.
Good morning and good afternoon to you.
Thank you. Yoel, you came to my attention when I read an article titled F-35 Hiccup on Road to Israel-UAE Accord in Yahoo News. Now, in the report there, you said, and I quote, "I absolutely think that without the F-35, the possibility of buying it, they, the Emiratis that is, wouldn't sign up to the normalisation agreement with Israel." Now, is this a real serious sticking point, would you say, Yoel? Does Israel want and insist on blocking the possibility of the UAE purchasing any F-35 fighters from the US?
I think it's a real problem for Israel. But let's talk about the broad agreement, the broad pact that brought together the UAE and Israel. And I do agree with what I said. I don't think without the plane there was the possibility of getting to this stage, to warmer ties between the Emiratis and Israelis going out of the table. I mean, you know, the pact is formalizing nearly 2 decades of ties lying just below the surface of official relations. Concerns over Iran, uncertainty over U.S. Middle East strategy have propelled many in the Gulf, not just the Emiratis, towards commercial exchange with Israel, diplomatic engagement, and even security coordination. The tacit relation meant to strike a balance between addressing regional threat, namely Iran and Turkey, and quell or pacify domestic pressure. That's why it was tacit and quiet. I think both Israel and the Arab Gulf states have prioritized stronger coordination with each other, with the Palestinian issue receding in its importance in recent years.
So Israel will decide this, hopefully by means of its Knesset, ultimately. Is it absolutely vital for Israel to prevent the UAE from having these planes, because they could potentially, if they become enemies, that they could be used against the state of Israel?
I think for Israel is a problem. It's a problem that this kind of technology will be in other hands in the Middle East. Although the UAE is a friend now, we and the Americans sold advanced weaponry in the past to regimes that are now foes and are enemies of Israel. Iran, Turkey,
yes,
both have at least had sophisticated American weaponry in the past. So if the regime might fall, something will happen there, the UAE. I don't see it in the near future, but you know, who knows in the Middle East. Those weapons can fall into the wrong hands. This is one thing that Israel is, of course, worried about. You know, eroding what we call the Israel advantage, qualitative military advantage in the region. By the way, it's an American law. It's in the Congress. I think the Congress is the biggest hurdle, not Israel inside, although in Israel these days everything is political, and if Bibi brought this pact, those who are against Bibi will probably try to say this is wrong. Another thing that is problematic with this plane being sold to the Emiratis, probably maybe a bigger problem, is that it might accelerate an already existent arms race in the region. Already now in the region, we see, especially the Gulf states, arming themselves to the teeth with all kinds of advanced weapons, mostly American, but not always. If the Americans refuse to sell missiles, attack drones, etc., they go to China. So this is a big dilemma for Israel, and this is true when the Americans say, listen, if we won't sell, they'll go elsewhere. It's not just trying to sell their weaponry, although the Americans, and especially this administration, put very high on the agenda the sale of weapons and arms in order to get especially now with the coronavirus and the slowdown in the American economy, they want to jumpstart the economy. And what better way to jumpstart the economy? Sell this billions of dollars weaponry, and they have the money, the Emirates. And this is, for Trump, it's a big deal. For this administration, this is a big deal. The Emiratis wants it. The Americans wants to sell it. So Israel is now the problem, and this is really a hurdle that can affect not just the pace of progress with the UAE, but also, might inject tensions to Israel relations with the White House. So this is a big thing. I think that at the end, it seems that one might compensate Israel if the Americans will come up with a formula that might give Israel something in return and give the Emiratis the F-35, but not the best F-35 there is, a different version of the F-35 without all kinds of very sensitive things on it. That might be, at the end of the road, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. This is just me thinking.
Well, what Israel is hoping, I think, is to see a signing ceremony, well, the US as well, in Washington for this normalisation deal with the UAE by mid-September. That's what a member of the Prime Minister's cabinet has said. Now, until then, is there going to be a lot of wrangling going on behind the scenes as to the precise wording of the agreement in order to get it finalised in time for this grand ceremony?
I'm not sure. I think the administration and Trump himself want more than everything a photo opportunity in the Rose Garden. He wants the ceremony. He needs it. He thinks he needs it for his campaign. I don't think American voters go to vote because of foreign policy or the Middle East issues. They have bigger problems, especially now. But Trump really wants it. The White House wants it, the ceremony. I don't know who else will come to the ceremony. I don't think you need a final agreement if you want to do the ceremony. It's better if you have it, but it's not necessary. And I even heard about delaying it a little bit. So I don't know. I think there's a big, not just with the ceremony. From what I understand, the administration is really pushing hard and trying to finalize the F-35 before Biden goes into office. This is half a year if Biden goes into office. They want to finalize, and this is a record pace. When you talk about arms sales with that magnitude, it's sometimes more than a year to finalize everything. It's a long time. It's going to be interesting to see how Congress react to that, and Israel friends in the Congress will react to that, and what message they will get from Israel itself. I think the Prime Minister will have a hard time. He cannot go out now and say something else than he refused the sale of those weapons. He already said, didn't change my mind, and this is not in the agreement. True, it's not in the agreement. Maybe it's a side understanding between the U.S. and the UAE. This is an interesting, and it's an obstacle. Absolutely, it's an obstacle for the fulfillment and the pace. Already, the Emiratis canceled one meeting a week ago because of that. Just to signal Israel and the U.S. that they're not happy with what's going on around the F-35 question.
Okay. Now, this burgeoning peace deal, Yoel, with Israel had more to do with suspending West Bank annexation and boosting the economy than with regional tensions over Iran. That's at least what the United Arab Emirates State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Anwar Gargash, said at the Atlantic Council, a US-based think tank. Now, is the UAE-Israel deal about halting annexation and boosting economic ties and not really about Iran? Or would you say that Iran is really a centerpiece as part of this agreement is concerned?
Nor this, nor that. I think there's several possible motivations behind the UAE decision to go out of the closet with Israel. They said it's primarily proposed to prevent Israel annexation parts of the West Bank. I think Mohammed bin Zayed, the active ruler of the federation, I think he hopes, first of all, to improve the UAE image in the US. This image was tarnished in recent years because of several deeds the UAE made, the war in Yemen, the blockade on Qatar, and the cooperation with one Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, who we both know did a few things that the international community is not happy with. Yes. And especially the American Congress. This is the issue. It's not the White House, it's the Congress. We're not happy with what the UAE did in Yemen and elsewhere. Issues of freedom of press, freedom of speech, etc., etc. So with that, MBZ hopes to improve the image, perhaps also present Trump with an accomplishment, as we said, photo op in the Rose Garden in the White House that will help Trump, perhaps, in his campaign. Another thing, I think that there's quite, I will say, even fear of what will happen if Biden is elected. The Gulf countries and the UAE among them is worried that if Biden is to be elected, he will be, first of all, soft with Iran. We saw some when he gave speeches. We have heard Biden talking about Iran. There's a genuine fear that he might go back and be soft on Iran, lower the pressure on Iran. Of course, the Gulf states don't want that. Another thing that they worry of, not just that he will be soft on Iran, he will be hard on them on, as I said, freedom of speech, all kinds of human rights issues. There's a big fear. Trump is very easy on that and very comfortable to those countries. All he wants in their eyes, and I'm simplifying it in purpose, we can sell weapons. We want your money. That's the deal that Trump made with those countries when he got into office. But the main issue, and you touched upon that in the beginning, is not just the F-35. The UAE wants to improve its relation with the US. This is the bargain. It's not Israel they want. It's the US. And when you go to Washington, you go through Jerusalem, and it's been like that for many, many years. It's not new. What new and dramatic is the thing itself, going out of the closet and normalizing relation. But what the UAE really want is to get closer, and not just the F-35. We talk about they talk about other ammunitions and other weapon system, advanced drones, attack drones, cyber intelligence, all kind of things in order to get their security better vis-a-vis Iran, but to get the US closer to them. They fear, and they have some substance to this, that the US is distancing itself from the Middle East. Obama and later Trump talked about it, did things about it. So this is the biggest motivation, I think, that the UAE have. Get the US closer and get the weapons that they want.
Right. But we did not discuss this deal prior to the announcement with any of our friends, none of them. No Arab country, nobody, because we clearly thought this will actually jeopardize the deal. These are the words of, once again, the United Arab Emirates State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Anwar Gargash. Apparently, Netanyahu also didn't divulge what was going on to his coalition partners, Benny Gantz and Israel's Foreign Minister, Gabi Ashkenazi. Would you say that it was appropriate for Netanyahu to have done this deal by himself without consulting his colleagues in the government?
I don't think so. But, you know, these days, not just in Israel, but maybe especially in Israel, everything is so political, sometimes toxic. I think Netanyahu's, in his eyes, he worked for many years for this agreement with the Emiratis and with others that might follow the Emiratis. We can talk about it. He wants the glory. Why share the glory with Gantz or Ashkenazi? And especially if they're on the opposite side of the political arena. Why share the spoil? Why, it's his. Maybe that's how he sees that. When it happened, some reacted, said that he didn't want to share this information because he was afraid, and others were afraid because they will leak this to Israel enemies, to the Iranians and others. I don't buy that. This is of course, this is nonsense. But I think it was from political reasons. I don't think he wanted to share this achievement with them, let them enjoy this achievement, which is very big, and they remain on the sideline. I know he's the one with the NSC who's doing all the work.
That's the way I would see it as well, I would say. Now, the Palestinian leadership has reacted and continues to react very badly to the announcement of the Israel-UAE deal, accusing the UAE of stabbing the Palestinians in the back. Now, unlike the PA, apparently 100,000 Palestinians who live in the UAE have welcomed the deal with Israel. Breaking from the PA's rejectionism, Palestinians living in the UAE feel a bit differently about the accord as one that they contend will contribute to stability in the Middle East. Now, does this signal or indicate a serious fracturing of the Palestinian Authority if so many Palestinians in the diaspora are not agreeing with it?
It's both. I think the deal weakens the ideals set out by the Palestinians and by the Arab Peace Initiative to have Palestinian state established before any normalization with Israel. This was the Palestinian leverage on Israel. This leverage is not entirely gone because we see other countries sitting on the fence, not deciding yet to join the UAE, the Saudis, the Omanis, the Bahrainis. Countries in Africa like Sudan, like Morocco, are not yet joining this party, although there's a massive U.S. pressure on them. Last week it was Pompeo visited several countries. I think it was in the Gulf, it was in Sudan as well. And this week we see Kushner. Kushner was yesterday in the UAE, today is in Saudi Arabia. Massive pressure. You know what? Just between you and me, because nobody's listening, I don't know what the U.S. is promising those countries now. I know the Sudanese really wants to go out of the blacklist of the State Department of state sponsoring of terrorism, so they'll get that. They'll get sanctions relief, all kind. Everybody wants something. Nobody's doing this in the sake of Israel. They're not joining the Zionist movement yet. With regard to the Palestinians, I can understand their frustration, although, they refused to go to the negotiation table. What did they expect? And there's a real frustration. I follow this for many, many years. There's real frustration with the Palestinians in the publics and in the elites of some of the Gulf states. We've seen Mohammed bin Salman, even Mohammed bin Zayed, sometimes leaked what they said to people they met about the Palestinians. They're tired of the Palestinians refusing all the time to compromise, to go to the negotiation table. Absolutely, there's a lot of frustration with the Palestinian stance. Having said that, you talked about the 100,000 Palestinians who live in the UAE. Do you think they can say something against Mohammed bin Zayed? Let me remind you and your listeners, these are police states. These are authoritarian countries. Let me see someone say something bad about the rulers.
Yeah,
Not
well,
going to happen.
Yes, well, certainly that's the case. If I can point out with the cartoon that I sent out with the publicity for this program, where a Jordanian artist or cartoonist drew a picture and showed an Israeli dove with a Magen David on its breast and spitting into the face of the UAE with F-35 landing on this figure's face. And this Jordanian cartoonist was originally arrested for doing this because it's apparently against the law in a country like Jordan to degrade or denigrate any other Arab country in this fashion. So this was deemed to be very provocative to do this kind of thing.
I just wanted to mention a few, pros and cons, advantages of disadvantages of this agreement to Israel. If we have some time, very briefly, I think Israel made, if this will be fulfillment, the road is still long. We have a lot of hurdles, and one of them is the F-35, the Congress. Israel will make peace with another Arab nation, a very important Arab nation, by the way. The first, not in Israel borders. Economic and security opportunities for both sides are vast. Others now in discussions. Other countries are in normalization discussions with Israel or with the US, and some, I very much hope so, may follow the UAE footsteps. The UAE, let's say it, has managed to postpone annexation, and I think this is a good thing. I didn't see annexation in this timing, in the form that he presented it, the Prime Minister, as a good thing for Israel national security. I really hope also that normalization will also promote settlement. It will give some kind of momentum to the Israeli-Palestinian track. I think that if the UAE will want, it can actually have leverage on Israel now with regard to the Palestinian issue. There's another country now, and now we talk about the cons, that might, pressure Israel beside Jordan and Egypt to do more. I think Israel will think twice about its actions in the region now that the UAE is its friend. Something that Israel does might not, go together, or fit UAE interests, not just in Palestinian issue. So although Israeli-UAE peace will likely be warmer than Israel peace with Egypt and Jordan, because there's no bad blood, because we can get much more from the Emiratis. It's a really rich country, and they want Israeli tech. I mean, this is interest. This is not, this is cold interest. It's not love and peace and doves flying around. This is cold calculations of Mohammed bin Zayed. He did a big thing. We talked about the F-35, the potential acquisition of the F-35 that can lead not just the erosion of the QME, the Israeli Qualitative Military Edge, but also accelerate a regional arms race. And this is a big thing, big hurdle for Israel. It also, in the UAE eyes, might expose them, the Emiratis, to Iranian and Turkish criticism, provocations, maybe an attack. I think Iran motivation to take action against the UAE is higher now. It doesn't mean that they will do it tomorrow morning. But yesterday, we had several explosions in the UAE. Several people died of explosion in Abu Dhabi and in Dubai. Two accidents, I think. I hope it's an accident and not something else. It happened at the same time, just when the Israeli El Al plane landed for the first time, officially for the first time, in the UAE. Was that an accident? Was that a reminder that some forces in the UAE or maybe outside, maybe Iran, that is very close and have a lot of influence inside the Emirates, are not happy with this pact? Perhaps time will tell.
On the Palestinian side, once again, we both know of Mohammed Dahlan, who is currently an exiled Palestinian dissident living in the UAE. And he's being marked out as being the person behind the scenes as the architect of this deal between Israel and the UAE, and which has provoked a lot of fury back home. But is he still a contender for a leadership position in the PA once Abbas goes, would you say?
That's a good question. I'm not an expert to the Palestinian arena, but when I talk to experts, they say that he's one of a few. He's not the leading contender. By the way, the fact that the UAE is backing him, I don't think it works for his favor. The UAE lost its influence inside of Palestinians' territories, both in Gaza-controlled Hamas, because this is political Islam, this is Muslim Brotherhood affiliated group that the UAE sees as an enemy. So no influence in Gaza, but also with Mahmoud Abbas, with the PA. I think Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the last time he visited the UAE was a decade ago. So there's no relations there. There's bad blood there because the backing of Mohammed Dahlan, who's living in Dubai and who's trying to do charity and tunnel money into the PA and into Gaza to get more influence and more backing there. Is it working? Was he behind? I don't think he was really behind. He's an advisor to Mohammed bin Zayed. I think Mohammed bin Zayed listened to him, but I don't think this is Mohammed bin Zayed decision. It's not an easy decision for the Emirati leader. There's a lot of criticism, not just from the Palestinians, but if you see the Qataris, if you look at the Turks, the Iranians, all are criticizing the UAE, and the UAE stance and its status in the Arab world is very important, and they're very sensitive about that. So it came with a price for them as well. They're paying the price, perhaps not internally, because this is a very small population of less than 1 million citizens, only 1 million citizens. The other 9 millions are foreign workers. So there you have it, 1 million citizens who are controlled by the government. Even their phones are being tracked. So I don't think they can speak against the pact. So he's perhaps quiet inside, But outside, there's enemies and rivals of the UAE, not just Iran, but Turkey as well.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Yoel, for speaking with me today on the Israel Connection, sharing with us your extensive knowledge and expertise on Gulf politics and security matters in the region. Much appreciated. Very
Cheers.
enjoyable speaking with you.
Thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you soon again, and maybe face to face.